Hey, Todd from the Lyceum here. I'm here to talk to you about alcohol violence legislation. So last night, which was the 3rd of February on Monday, I went out to the Metro Theatre where they had a whole bunch of speakers in the mix, sorted it out, along with Keep Sydney Open and Century Venues being able to put it on there. They all came together to talk about alcohol violence legislation. So if you haven't seen our article write-up about it, there's part 1 and part 2. Part 1 covers the speakers and their opinions. Part 2 covers the audience questions and also a conclusion. So if you haven't seen them, go to thelyceum.com.au, check that out. Or if you really don't care about reading, I'll be telling you it all right now. The only added difference is that a bit more of my opinion will be thrown in with this video. So I may be looking down a bit because I have all my stuff that I have to read off of here. So, let's get started. Tim Duggan from In The Music acted as the moderator for the evening, so he wasn't really talking about his opinions on things. The speakers for the night included John Green, who's the director of the AHA, the Australian Hotels Association, and is also a former New South Wales police officer. John Kay, a politician for the Greens Party. Kirsty Brown, the executive officer at Music New South Wales. Alex Greenwich, the independent MP for Sydney. Andrew Levins, the DJ and promoter. Dr. Alex Wodak, Director of the Alcohol and Drug Service at St. Vincent's Hospital. So when it opened up, Tim Duggan said that they came together to talk about legislation, what could be done. The legislation went through so quickly that they had to change the focus of the forum. So the focus became everyone having their say, education, and action, which I'll revisit those three at the end of the video. So first up, Alex Greenwich, he broke down holes in the legislation, mainly that when people are leaving the venue at 3 AM, that's the taxi changeover. So there aren't going to be any taxis, and the transport from Sydney already isn't that fun. Queuing at 1 AM to get into venues, or queuing at 2:30 before the alcohol gets finished, can cause conflict, people waiting in lines who are already drunk, who are already angry. There needs to be a bit more effort in taking on venues who don't follow their RSA, and just give alcohol to people who are already completely smashed, and for there to be a bit more repercussions on that. Next up was Kirsty Brown. She talked about her reasons for forming the Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance. If you haven't checked them out, I highly recommend it. Their link will be in the description below. And for a lot of details on what Kirsty Brown talks about with forming it, you can also go to our website where we have their press release and talk about the Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance and the things that they are trying to do to help against these laws. And Kirsty ended her speech with a statement that live music is not dead, which came to thunderous applause from everyone who was in the metro. Yeah, that's awesome! Woo, 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 yeah. So you're gonna overdub all those voices afterwards? Yeah? Okay, good. Because I don't want to sound like an idiot who was just clapping by himself in a room. Next up was Dr. Alex Wodak. I feel bad for the guy because he got a bit of flack because people seem to think that he was representing the pro-lockout laws, but he really wasn't. Like, he's pro-regulation of alcohol, but for some reason he had a couple of hecklers just wanted to give him shit. His talk was focused on the punishment side of the laws, saying that longer prison sentencing is more of a politically beneficial thing than just a naturally beneficial thing. It's going to cost taxpayer money to keep people in jail, and if more people are going to jail for longer, that's just more money that needs to be spent. He agrees that alcohol needs to be regulated or prevented from a lot of people getting it easily, but he thinks that these laws are too little too late and it just shifts the violence from one area to another. He did propose some solutions as opposed to the laws. One was increasing the cost of alcohol, another was reducing the availability of alcohol, and the last one was regulating alcohol advertisements. Next up was John Green, the director of the AHA. He downplayed a lot of media's representation of violence, which I think a lot of people can agree with. They got very overhyped, and instead of very dramatic, high-profile cases, they wanted to focus on every little bit of violence that happened with it throughout the city. Which kind of creates that culture of fear, like I can't go out because people are gonna hit me or drunkards are just gonna like fuck with me. I'm far away from the city, I'm just outside of Parramatta in my house. I'm afraid right here, I think I'm gonna get punched in the head. That is the power of media. John Green also talks about the Newcastle laws of which the Sydney ones are based off. He explained how yes, when you focus on Newcastle as its own little city suburb, then the violence has gone down, but when you look at it as the entire region, there hasn't really been much of a difference. It's shifted around, it's just that people don't go into the city. And he also agrees with the point that Alex Greenwich brought up about people being en masse out into the city at night after they've been drinking and the problems with transport. Next up was Andrew Levins. He was talking about putting up anti-alcohol campaigns similar to what you see with cigarettes. His reasoning was that if you can look at a cigarette packet and there's a decomposing zombie corpse, this is verbatim, then why not, if you have a beer bottle, you open up the cap, underneath the cap it just says, "Don't be a fuckwit." Props to Andrew for the language. I don't take any responsibility for that kind of wit. Although I'd propose something else. If you want to have images showing like what you can do, especially with these new laws in, you're going to be in jail for like 2 to 8 years, possibly even longer, depending on what the assault is. Why don't you just have a guy on the bottle getting like sodomized in jail? I think that's pretty effective. Hey, you think you're a big man now, gonna hit people on the head? Wait till you get to jail. You'll see some pretty big men in there. Andrew Levins also talked about the media portrayal of people for and against the laws, bringing up the Sydney Morning Herald article that he was involved with, where people who are pro-lockout got interviewed by journalists, people who are anti-lockout got quoted and taken out of context from Twitter and social media instead of being actually talked to. He also mentions the ignorance of pro-lockout people from those who haven't actually experienced the nightlife, don't go out into the city at night, don't actually experience what it's like. And lastly, John Kay from the Greens spoke. He looked at the problems of rushing legislation together when there was pressure from the media and people saying that Barrow Farrell wasn't doing anything. So they put together this vague, full of holes issued legislation that's more of just a knee-jerk reaction. And then they push it through Parliament before it can even get debated on or organised and get refined. And he also talks about the Greens' reasoning for being against the bill, which they did as a party. And that as a result of talking about it, they believe that it is not the Greens' job to send people to bed, or to kill the nightlife, or to send people to jail, or to be involved in collective punishment of innocent people who just want to go out and have fun. John Kay also brings up the Newcastle laws as well. He talks about how they work in isolated areas, but not very big city areas like Sydney is. And he talked about how 2 people dying in the Cross as a result of alcohol-related injury, and taking that to blame the entire Sydney nightlife and venues, is a knee-jerk reaction, and need to remember that correlation does not mean causation. He also disagreed with ferrying people around the city because at the moment the legislation only says about 10-minute buses going from King's Cross to the CBD where there are no trains running. He also talks about the police force, mainly the Alcohol Licensing Enforcement Command, being better resourced because as it stands, the police cannot crack down on venues that do not follow their RSA and do not stop serving people who are already completely drunk or help them get home. Instead, they just push them out of the venue. Kay also brought up an interesting point that with the vagueness of the legislation, if you were with a friend, drunk, in a bar, you're arguing about something, whatever, one friend just pushes the other friend, if they fall off and injure themselves and you're caught on CCTV, that is 2 years imprisonment. 2 years. That is a lot of sodomy. John Kay finished his talk by saying that the laws are irrational and irresponsible. And that's it from all of the speakers. After this, they turned it to the audience and wanted to ask some questions. I also had my own question that I wanted to ask, but nobody asked me. But it's okay, I'm not that broken up about it. So a lot of times people were just stating things. The questions that were asked were mostly agreed upon by the speakers on stage, so I haven't really included the back and forth, just the main points that came up during the question time. The first person who stand up questioned whether these laws will cause a lot more of underground parties, which can also result in people who don't know how to mix drinks and don't have an actual RSA, which means more trouble. But that's also kind of what happens with Marrickville, because Marrickville have a problem with venues and basically just make warehouse gigs, and they're all underground parties, pretty much. So it might not be a stretch to think that if this happens on a wider scale throughout Sydney, then more underground parties could happen. There was also another woman who talked about travelling to Newcastle, seeing the nightlife, then ever since the laws came in, the city's dead. And if you go out on Friday, Saturday night, there's no one really around, it's just really dead. Which was followed up by Andrew Levins weighing in, wondering why Newcastle and Sydney get compared so often, and reasoned that violence statistics in Newcastle went down because on the weekend people from Newcastle just come to Sydney and party, and then they leave and go back on Sunday. Mark Gerber, who owns the Oxford Art Factory, also talked at the forum, and he was wondering about the increase of drug use that will happen as a result of people not getting more access to alcohol, and wondered why when Oxford Street and places like Surrey Hills were in a worse spot before, then when the venue started up, it got better, there weren't as much violence on the streets. Why are the good neighbourhoods lumped in with the bad neighbourhoods? Isabella Manfredi from The Preachers also talked at the forum. She was saying how the world are looking to Australia for new music, which on a scale that hasn't been seen since the 80s. And if laws like this end up diminishing opportunities for Sydney bands to get noticed, end up diminishing ability for the band to get out there and be seen by the public and overseas and build up their strength, there's going to be a wasted opportunity at the point when overseas are looking at where music is coming from in here. She also looked at the social problems to do with drinking, where the people who just drink to get drunk and don't just drink because they enjoy a drink. and looked at the cultural focus that Australia has on sport, and even when sporting's waning, where we don't really have the crack swimming team we did, don't exactly have the crack cricket team that we used to, whereas music is going from strength to strength and getting Grammy nominations, playing at South by Southwest, and increasing its stranglehold overseas. Did I just say stranglehold? That doesn't sound right. I shouldn't say stranglehold, it's a cuddle. Australia is snuggling with the rest of the world now. But with music getting even stronger and the sports side getting a bit less, there's still total focus on sport instead of music. She also gave her frustrations at the fact that she was angry and wanted to yell at someone, but there was nobody at the forum to yell at who was responsible. Everyone there agreed and was on the same side. Kirsty Brown also weighed in after this, talking about the youth culture idea and of how it's a source of pride. She stated of how when she grew up in Campbelltown, it was an idea of you should be respected because you get your stomach pumped, and there's an odd sort of, happiness and peer enjoyment that like, oh yeah, you got smashed. Which is also an ideal that hasn't been lost to time, because I remember that happening when I was in high school, and I know other people who I know younger than me who have the same kind of thing happening. At this point in the evening, there started to be a bit of rowdiness in the crowd. Those people who were heckling at Dr. Wodak earlier in the evening decided to speak up. I assume it was them because they were the people in the exact same vicinity. And because they started yelling out, somebody got them a microphone because, oh my god, people are talking, get them some way to be heard by everyone. And then the night kind of got hijacked for a little while, where some guy stood up who represented another group, not affiliated with Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance, and he started ranting about their petitions, because there was a petition when you walked in from the Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance. He was ranting about that and saying, oh, we have this is actually official for giving to Parliament, everybody sign this so we can get it done. But his whole attitude, okay, I'm gonna go around here for a little bit, excuse me while I rant. His whole attitude was like, we just need to repeal the laws, fuck the laws. But the laws are there for a reason. Yeah, why would anybody disagree that there is an issue to do with alcohol violence? There shouldn't be anybody dying on the street because somebody's drunk enough to hit someone. It shouldn't result in a complete blanket ban that affects everybody, but there's still an importance to having a particular law that can affect those people to dismantle that kind of attitude. And if you're the kind of person who goes up to the government and they're just like, oh, let's just repeal these laws, see these laws that you just put in? Fuck them, get rid of them. You're just going to be painted as the guy who prefers drinking alcohol, getting smashed and punching people in the head. That's what happened from the Sydney Morning Herald article with Andrew Levins. He said that as a result, people were contacting him on Twitter, through Facebook, and accusing him of being pro-violence and pro-getting smashed, which is the complete opposite of his attitude. Here's a quick reenactment of how that kind of hijacking went. I disagree with all these things, it's completely fucked. We have to get rid of all these laws, we have a petition, it's going to go to the government, and we are angry. We are angry at this. Yeah, dude, we're all angry, yeah, we're all angry. We're all angry, right? That's what we're here for. Yeah, I can't believe that these people would do something like this. This is just terrible. Are you mean the people up there? The people who are on our side? Who are you angry at? They're not here. Dude, we're on your side. Eventually it did get reined back in, although it did kind of start up a bit more people just kind of yelling out from the crowd. The one main point that came up from this hijackers rant was the fact that with this legislation coming through, it can be worse to walk through the city. If it's late at night, you know that there's going to be all these drunk people out in the streets at the same time. Why would you want to be out at the same time? And if the same thing happens to Sydney that happened in Newcastle, where the night becomes very dead throughout the city, then no one in Sydney is going to want to do the same, because you're not going to walk through an empty city, especially in areas that are known to be high risk, because it's just going to be too dangerous. This was where the night finally came to an end and people started to disperse. So here are my conclusions about the whole night itself. Considering it was a Monday night and had a decent turnout to the Metro for it being a Monday night talking about political legislation, it felt like a lot of the things that were talked about, everybody already knew. Everyone was agreeing with each other. It wasn't really new information being brought in. There weren't any opposition to the anti-lockout people that were there to talk. And just going through the few things that were talked about that the forum would have a purpose for. Number one, everyone has their say. That didn't really happen. Not everybody got to have their say. Why? One of the main things that I felt should have come up, and the question I was going to ask, were about the exemptions. In the legislation it says that venues can be made exempt by paying a fee, doing some certain thing. And then the venues won't have to worry about lockouts, which kind of makes it pointless, the whole legislation, if you can just buy your way out. Although it's the curious thing of how they haven't told any details. Nobody knows how much it's going to cost. They've said to venues that they're going to approach them, although based on people who I've talked to, the venue exemption doesn't actually exist. Apparently it's just a random source that nobody in the Parliament actually knows what happened. So not sure what's happening there. If there are actually fees, they could be so high that it's only the big high roller type places that can actually pay their way out. The second purpose was education. That pretty much got covered because if anybody wasn't sure about any of the details to do with the legislation, things around the legislation, why it might not work, that was definitely brought up throughout the evening so everybody would be caught up to speed. And finally, action. There was no real talk about action, like what to do, where to go, which is kind of difficult at this phase because the legislation is so vague and the politicians haven't really given details about everything that's going to happen that you can't really make a actual action plan without knowing that, because otherwise you're going to go to the streets, you're going to be marching, you're going to be approaching politicians, you're going to be saying stuff that they don't understand. Because if people approach them not talking about exemption laws and just saying, oh, this is going to be terrible for live music, you're going to destroy live music venues, the politicians are just going to reply with, well, no we're not, because there's an exemption clause right there, you can be exempt, so nobody has a problem. The issue with creating action in order to stop this is that you need to know the very specific things to approach. You have to know how the Parliament are going to react to it, whether they're going to actually listen, whether you're on their playing field. If they don't care about live music, they're probably not going to give a shit if you're making rallies to save live music. If you approach them about something else, say an issue with tourism, or the fact that the city could become dead and you'll end up losing money even if events are put on, that can be something that they'll more focus on. Many times when you're involved in something like a big group, an issue is that you get that mob mentality, and the problem with that is that there's less of a direction and it's more of just people yelling. And I really never get into that, and it always makes me want to turn away from whatever group actually starts stuff like this. However, at the end of it, I was talking to people involved with the Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance, and speaking to them, who are a mix of venue owners, publications, people who work in the industry. They have their head screwed on. They know the direction that needs to be taken. They know that you can't just yell and stamp your foot to get stuff changed. So I'll reiterate once again, Sydney Late Night Culture Alliance, go support them. You can sign up with them, you can help out in any way you can, even if it's just liking their page and just saying that you support what they do, signing their petition. Because I feel that them as a small group focusing on what needs to be done with a mass following who will support them, that's what needs to be done. You can't just have a large group of people all yelling out things. So I think that's about it. This recording has gone for about 35 minutes, so hopefully this video will actually be considerably shorter. I paused and fucked up a lot in that video. So after edits, it will be a bit more compressed. I hope you enjoyed this Derailed video. There should hopefully be more forums in the future. I would hope so, as more details come to light. So if they do, it would be a good idea to go to them because they'll probably be looking at what can be done. If you want more information on any of this, or if you want to follow news to do with this and not miss out on anything, just keep going to the Lyceum, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, like, subscribe, share this video with other people so that others can know what happened at the forum, because even if you weren't able to go, I feel like it's important to get the information out there. Thank you, I will see you later, be good.